His name was Stryker, and the road was his only constant. It was a ribbon of scarred asphalt that spooled out before him, a gray promise that stretched from one horizon to the next. He rode a machine of chrome and black steel, an extension of his own will, its engine a low, guttural heartbeat that was more familiar to him than his own. The leather cut on his back bore the emblem of his brotherhood, a phoenix rising from flames, circled by the words, "Sons of Redemption." To the world, they were monsters, outlaws, a menace to be feared and avoided. To each other, they were the only family they had left. The small town of Harmony Creek appeared like a mirage shimmering in the late afternoon heat. It was a place that time seemed to have forgotten, with a single main street lined with brick storefronts and faded awnings. It was not a destination, merely a pause, a place for fuel and food before the road called him onward. He swung his leg over the bike, the heavy leather of his chaps groaning in protest. His boots hit the pavement with a solid thud that seemed to echo in the quiet street. Heads turned, eyes widened. A mother pulled her child closer, her hand a white-knuckled grip on a small shoulder. A shopkeeper paused his sweeping, his face a mask of suspicion. Stryker felt their fear like a physical presence. He was used to it. He wore it like a second layer of leather. The diner was called the Corner Nook. Its sign was a cheerful, peeling yellow, a stark contrast to the grim reality of his reception. The bell above the door chimed a tinny, unwelcome song as he entered. The low hum of conversation faltered, then died completely. Forks clattered against plates, then fell silent. Every eye in the small, crowded room was on him. He was a large man, built from years of hard living and harder roads. Scars mapped the story of his life across his knuckles and along his jawline. His beard was streaked with gray, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, missed nothing. He ignored the stairs, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on an empty booth in the corner, the one farthest from the window, the one that gave him a clear view of the entire room and the only exit. It was instinct, it was survival. A young waitress, her name tag reading Betty, approached his table with a visible tremor in her hands. She held a coffee pot like a weapon she was unsure how to wield. "What can I get for you, sir?" Her voice was a nervous squeak. "Coffee, black." His voice was gravel, low and rough from the road dust and the engine's roar. "And a menu." She nodded quickly, pouring the coffee with a splash that sent dark liquid across the tabletop. She mumbled an apology and scurried away, leaving him in the bubble of silence that had formed around his booth. He took a slow sip of the coffee. It was bitter and strong. Good. He was not alone for long. The door chimed again, and 4 more men entered, each one a mirror of him in their own way. They wore the same cut, the same hardened expressions. There was Bear, a mountain of a man whose size belied a steady calm. Ghost, wiry and quiet, his eyes constantly moving, analyzing, cataloging. Doc, with the steady hands of a surgeon and the haunted look of a man who had put too many people back together. And Raven, the only woman, her black hair in a tight braid, her gaze as sharp and uncompromising as any of theirs. They were his brothers, his sister, his chapter. They filled the booth around him, a silent phalanx of leather and steel. The fear in the diner intensified, becoming a thick, suffocating blanket. The other patrons ate their meals in hurried silence, eager to pay their checks and flee. The Sons of Redemption paid them no mind. They were an island, self-contained and self-sufficient. It was in this tense, charged atmosphere that he first saw her. She was an elderly woman sitting alone in a booth by the window. Her hair was a cloud of silver, and her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, were wrapped around a mug of tea. She had a fragility about her, a sense of quiet sorrow that clung to her like a shawl. She seemed out of place, a delicate porcelain figure in a room full of rough-hewn wood. She was staring out the window, her gaze distant, lost in a memory that only she could see. There was a profound loneliness in her posture that resonated with a distant, forgotten part of Stryker's own soul. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of widows and gold star mothers. It was the look of someone who had lost their anchor and was now adrift in a world that had moved on without them. He found himself watching her, a strange and unfamiliar protective instinct stirring in his chest. He dismissed it as a fleeting whim, a consequence of too many miles and not enough sleep. He was a nomad, a ghost on the highway. Attachments were a liability. Compassion was a weakness he could not afford. But the world had other plans. The bell on the door chimed again, but this time the sound was different. It was sharper, more intrusive. The man who entered was the polar opposite of the bikers. He wore an expensive suit, impeccably tailored, and shoes that shone with a blinding polish. His hair was perfectly coiffed, and a smile, cold and predatory, was plastered on his face. He radiated an aura of manufactured charm and deep-seated arrogance. He was a wolf in a cashmere coat. His name, they would soon learn, was Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling's eyes scanned the room, dismissing the bikers with a disdainful sneer before landing on the old woman by the window. His smile widened, and he glided toward her booth, his movements smooth and reptilian. The entire diner watched, a collective breath held in anticipation. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a slick, oily purr that slid through the silence. "Fancy seeing you here. I was just on my way to your little house." The old woman, Eleanor, visibly flinched. She drew her shoulders in, making herself smaller. "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice frail, but laced with a thread of defiance. "I have nothing more to say to you." "Oh, I think you do," he said, sliding into the seat opposite her, without invitation. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "The final notice was delivered yesterday, Eleanor. The deadline has passed. The town council has approved the eminent domain seizure. It's over." Eleanor's teacup rattled in its saucer. "It's not over. That house is all I have left of my husband. It's all I have left. You can't just take it." Mr. Sterling laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of any real humor. "I can, and I will. Progress, my dear Eleanor. This town needs a new shopping complex more than you need your dusty old memories. Sign the papers. Take the pittance I'm offering. It's better than getting nothing when the bulldozers arrive next week." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, tracing silver paths through the wrinkles on her cheeks. "You're a monster." "I'm a businessman," he corrected her, his smile never wavering. "And you are a stubborn old woman standing in the way of prosperity. Now be a dear, and don't make this any more unpleasant than it has to be." He slid a sheaf of papers across the table. "Sign." The entire diner was frozen. The townsfolk looked away, ashamed of their inaction, but too afraid to intervene. Mr. Sterling was a powerful man in Harmony Creek. He had connections, he had money, he was untouchable. To cross him was to invite ruin. And so they did nothing. They stared at their plates, they fiddled with their napkins, they became intensely interested in the cracks in the ceiling, all except for one booth. In the corner, 5 pairs of eyes were fixed on the drama unfolding by the window. Stryker felt a cold, familiar anger begin to burn in his gut. It was an old anger, born on foreign battlefields and honed in the back alleys of forgotten cities. It was the anger of a protector seeing the innocent preyed upon. He had seen bullies like Mr. Sterling his entire life, men who used their power, their position, their wealth to crush those weaker than themselves, men who mistook kindness for weakness and silence for consent. He watched as Eleanor's hand trembled, her spirit visibly crumbling under the weight of Sterling's cruelty. Her eyes, filled with a desperate, hopeless plea, darted around the room, searching for a savior who wasn't there. They swept past the averted gazes of her neighbors, the people she had likely known her whole life. They passed over the fearful face of the young waitress, and then her eyes met Stryker's. For a long moment, the world seemed to shrink until it contained only the two of them, the frightened old woman and the scarred, leather-clad biker. In her eyes, he saw not fear of him, but a desperate last-ditch flicker of hope. She saw past the tattoos, past the scowl, past the fearsome reputation that preceded him. In that moment, she saw something else, a potential ally, a port in a storm. an unthinkable, terrifying last resort. Her decision was an act of pure, unadulterated courage. It was the courage of the truly desperate, the kind that makes a mouse roar at a lion. Slowly, deliberately, Eleanor Gable pushed herself out of her booth. Her legs were unsteady, but her resolve was iron. She took a shuffling step, then another, moving away from Mr. Sterling and toward the corner booth, filled with the men everyone else in town was terrified of. The silence in the diner became absolute. It was a heavy, profound silence, broken only by the soft, shuffling sound of her worn-out shoes on the linoleum floor. Every person in the room watched, their hearts pounding in their chests. What was she doing? Was she insane? Mr. Sterling watched her go, a look of amused disbelief on his face. Eleanor, what on earth are you doing? Don't tell me you're going to ask these gentlemen for help. He gestured dismissively at the bikers. They'd probably be more interested in what's left in your wallet. Eleanor ignored him. Her focus was entirely on Stryker. She stopped at the edge of their table, her frail hands gripping the formica edge to steady herself. She looked directly at Stryker, her blue eyes, though clouded with tears, holding a strength that defied her age and her circumstances. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Please. I don't know who else to ask. That one word, spoken with such raw, unvarnished desperation, hung in the air like a live grenade. It was a plea, a challenge, a leap of faith into the unknown. The entire diner held its breath. Stryker looked at her. He saw the trembling in her hands, the terror in her eyes. But he also saw the spine of steel that had allowed her to walk across this room and ask for help from the very people society had taught her to fear. He saw courage. Without a word, he slid out of the booth. He was a big man, and he seemed to unfold himself, rising to his full, intimidating height. He towered over her, a mountain of black leather and hardened muscle. For a second, a flicker of doubt crossed Eleanor's face, the primal fear of his appearance warring with the hope that had driven her to him. Then, Stryker did something that no one in that diner expected. He dropped to one knee. He brought himself down to her level so that he was looking up into her eyes, not down at her. The gesture was one of profound, unexpected respect. It instantly stripped away the menace of his size, replacing it with a quiet deference. The king, kneeling before the Dowager Queen. Ma'am, he said, his gravelly voice now softened with a gentleness that seemed utterly incongruous with his appearance. My name is Stryker. Why don't you tell me what the problem is? The tension in the room snapped. It was replaced by a wave of stunned disbelief. Jaws literally dropped. The young waitress, Betty, let out a small audible gasp. Mr. Sterling scoffed, breaking the spell. Oh, this is rich. Don't waste your breath, old woman. This is a legal matter. It's none of his concern. Now come back here and sign the papers before I lose my patience. Stryker didn't even look at him. His focus remained entirely on Eleanor. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the fear of Sterling warring with the nascent hope he had just offered. He's trying to take my home, she said, her voice gaining a bit of strength. My husband, Arthur, he built that house with his own 2 hands after he came back from the war. Every nail, every board. It's all I have left of him. Mr. Sterling, he says the town wants the land for a new development. He says it's legal. Is it? Stryker asked, his voice still quiet, but with an underlying edge of steel. I don't know, she admitted. He flashes papers in my face, uses big words I don't understand. He's been harassing me for months, calling at all hours, showing up at my door, threatening me. No one will help me. The sheriff is his cousin. The mayor plays golf with him every Sunday. I'm alone. She said the last word with a finality that was heartbreaking. Stryker's gaze finally shifted from Eleanor, lifting to meet Mr. Sterling's smug, arrogant face across the room. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 20 degrees. The gentleness was gone from Stryker's eyes, replaced by something cold and hard and ancient. It was the look of a predator that has just identified its prey. You heard the lady, Stryker said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. She said, "You've been harassing her." Sterling stood up, straightening his tie in a gesture of dismissive arrogance. "This is a private business matter. It has nothing to do with you or your band of delinquents. I suggest you get back on your little toys and ride on out of my town before you find yourselves in a world of trouble." Bad choice. Very bad choice. Stryker rose slowly to his feet. Behind him, Bear, Ghost, Doc, and Raven also stood, a silent, menacing wall of leather and muscle. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Their presence was a statement. "Your town," Stryker repeated, taking a slow step forward. "I don't see your name on it." "I run this town," Sterling sneered, though a flicker of unease finally entered his eyes. He had clearly expected them to be cowed by his authority. He had miscalculated, badly. "Sheriff Miller is a personal friend of mine." "That's good to know," Stryker said, his voice dangerously calm. He stopped just a few feet from Sterling. The difference between them was stark. Sterling was soft, pampered, his power derived from paper and influence. Stryker was forged from hardship, his power emanating from an unshakable core of will. "It seems to me," Stryker continued, his voice dropping even lower, "that this business matter just became our concern. This lady is now under the protection of the Sons of Redemption Motorcycle Club. That means her home is under our protection. That means you will no longer be contacting her. You will no longer be visiting her. You will no longer be speaking her name." He took another step, closing the distance between them until he was invading Sterling's personal space. Sterling had to crane his neck to look up at him. "Am I making myself clear?" Sterling's face, which had been flushed with anger, was now pale with a sheen of sweat. The bully, confronted with a force he couldn't intimidate or buy, was starting to crumble. But his arrogance was a deep well. "You can't do this," he hissed, trying to regain his footing. "This is a legal seizure. I have the paperwork, the full backing of the city council." "Ghost," Stryker said, without taking his eyes off Sterling. The wiry biker stepped forward. He held up a smartphone, its screen glowing. "Mr. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Developments, you've used eminent domain clauses to acquire 12 properties from elderly residents in 3 different counties over the past 5 years. In every single case, the public use development project was abandoned after 6 months, and the land was rezoned and sold to a shell corporation you own for a massive private profit. The presiding judge, who approved all 12 seizures, was your brother-in-law. This isn't progress. It's a pattern. It's a racketeering scheme." The color drained completely from Sterling's face. The slick, confident businessman vanished, replaced by a cornered, panicked rat. How did you—" "We have our ways," Ghost said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You also have 2 outstanding warrants for assault in the next state over, filed by a Mr. and Mrs. Gable. No relation, I assume. Seems you have a habit of leaning on people who won't sell." Stryker leaned in closer, his voice a deadly whisper. "Paperwork can be a funny thing. It can be forged. It can be shredded. It can be lost. But a man's character? That's harder to hide. And right now, everyone in this diner sees you for exactly what you are." He gestured with his head, and Sterling looked around. The townsfolk were no longer staring at their plates. Every single person was staring at him. Their expressions a mixture of shock, dawning comprehension, and pure, unadulterated contempt. The shield of his reputation had been shattered. The whispers would start. The questions would be asked. His cozy arrangement in Harmony Creek was over. "Now," Stryker said, his voice returning to a conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than his anger. "You have 2 choices. You can walk out that door, get in your shiny car, and drive out of this county. You will tear up whatever fraudulent claim you have on Eleanor Gable's property, and you will never, ever come back. Or you can stay, and we can have a much longer, much more detailed conversation with your friend, Sheriff Miller, about your business practices. I'm sure the State Attorney General's office would be fascinated to hear about it too." Sterling stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. He was trapped, utterly and completely outmaneuvered. The physical threat of the bikers was one thing, but the surgical precision with which they had dismantled his life in under 5 minutes was something else entirely. It was terrifying. He snatched the papers from the table, his hands trembling with rage and fear. "This isn't over," he snarled, but his threat was hollow, pathetic. "Oh yes, it is," Stryker said calmly. With a final, hateful glare, Mr. Sterling turned and practically fled from the diner, the bell on the door chiming his frantic, undignified retreat. The moment he was gone, the diner erupted, not in applause, but in a wave of relieved, excited chatter. People were standing up, talking to their neighbors, looking at the bikers with a newfound sense of awe and respect. The fear was gone, replaced by something else. Gratitude. Stryker turned his back on the room, his attention returning to the only person who mattered. Eleanor was standing where he had left her, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears of relief now streaming down her face. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Oh, thank you." "It's not over yet, ma'am," Stryker said gently. "A snake like that doesn't just crawl away. He'll be back, or he'll send someone else. We need to secure your home." He turned to his chapter. "Bear, you and Doc stay with Eleanor. Escort her home. Make sure she's safe. Raven, you're with me. Ghost, I want you to make a call. Find me a lawyer in this state who hates corporate sharks more than he loves money. And dig deeper into Sterling. I want to know everything. Where he sleeps, what he eats, who he pays off. I want to bury him under a mountain of his own filth." The orders were given with quiet, efficient authority. The Sons of Redemption moved with purpose, a well-oiled machine kicking into gear. This was what they did. They were not just bikers, they were soldiers. They had a code, a mission, and Eleanor Gable had just become their mission. Bear, the giant of a man, approached Eleanor with a cautious deference. "Ma'am, if you'll allow us, we'd be honored to see you home safely." His voice was a deep, rumbling bass, but it was surprisingly soft. Eleanor looked from Bear's kind eyes to Stryker's resolute face, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt a flicker of something she had thought was lost to her forever. She felt safe. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yes, yes, please." As Bear and Doc gently guided Eleanor toward the door, the owner of the diner, a portly man named Gus, hurried over to Stryker's table. He was wiping his hands on his apron, his face beaming. "On the house," he said, gesturing to their half-empty coffee cups. "Everything, for all of you, for as long as you're in town. What you did for Eleanor, nobody else had the guts. Thank you." Stryker simply nodded his acknowledgement. He wasn't here for thanks. He was here to finish a job. The sun was beginning to set as Stryker and Raven followed Bear's bike out of town, the rumble of their engines, a promise of protection, echoing through the streets of Harmony Creek. Eleanor's house was a small, white clapboard cottage at the end of a long, tree-lined lane. It was modest and well-kept, with a porch swing and a garden full of blooming roses. It radiated a sense of peace and history, the kind of home that is built with love, not just wood and nails. It was easy to see why she was fighting for it. It was more than a house. It was a sanctuary. It was her husband's legacy. They parked their bikes in a semicircle in her gravel driveway, creating an intimidating perimeter of chrome and steel. Bear was already checking the locks on the doors, while Doc was doing a slow walk around the property, his eyes scanning for vulnerabilities. They moved with a practiced military precision that spoke of years of experience. Eleanor stood on her porch, looking at the organized chaos with a dazed expression. I don't know what to say. I can't possibly pay you for any of this." Raven swung off her bike and walked up the porch steps, pulling off her riding gloves. She took Eleanor's frail hand in her own. "You already have, dear," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "You trusted us when no one else would. That's a debt we're honored to repay. Now, why don't you let me make us all a fresh pot of coffee? It looks like it's going to be a long night." Inside, the house was just as Stryker had imagined. It was filled with memories. Framed photographs covered every surface. A young Eleanor on her wedding day, a handsome soldier in uniform, children and grandchildren laughing in the sun, a handmade quilt was draped over the back of an armchair. The air smelled of lemon polish and old books. It was a home, a real home. Stryker stood by the fireplace, looking at the photo on the mantel. It was the soldier, Arthur Gable. He looked young, strong, and full of hope. He was wearing the uniform of the 101st Airborne. Stryker felt a kinship with the man in the picture, a brother in arms, separated only by time. He was a good man, Eleanor said softly, coming to stand beside him. He fought for his country. He came home and built this life for us. He always said a man's duty was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He would have liked you, I think. We have a code in our club, ma'am, Stryker said, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. We protect our own, and we protect women and children. No exceptions, no excuses. A lot of us, we came from homes that weren't safe. We know what it's like to be helpless, to have no one in your corner. We made a promise to each other that we would never let that happen to anyone else if we could help it. He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time, he let her see past the hardened exterior. He let her see the man beneath the leather. What Sterling was doing to you, that's a line you don't cross. Not in our world. It was a confession, a mission statement. It was the heart of the Sons of Redemption, laid bare in the quiet living room of a stranger. They weren't just outlaws running from the world. They were guardians, standing against the darkness they knew all too well. They were the wounded, become the healers. Over the next few days, Eleanor's small cottage was transformed into a fortress and a home base. The Sons of Redemption didn't just stand guard, they went to work. Bear, who had been a contractor before the road claimed him, spent 2 days reinforcing the doors and windows, installing new deadbolts, and a security system Ghost had ordered online. He also noticed the porch steps were sagging, and before Eleanor could protest, he had torn them out and was building a new, sturdier set. Doc, a former combat medic, went through Eleanor's medicine cabinet, organizing her prescriptions and making sure she was taking her blood pressure medication correctly. He talked to her about her diet and made her a list of heart-healthy foods, which Raven then went and bought at the local grocery store, enduring the suspicious stares of the other shoppers with a stony indifference. Ghost was a phantom. He was rarely seen, but his work was constant. He sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, his laptop his only tool, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was a digital ghost, slipping through firewalls and into encrypted servers. He was mapping out Sterling's entire corrupt empire, tracing the money, identifying his co-conspirators, and compiling a dossier that would not just stop the man, but utterly destroy him. Stryker was the commander, coordinating it all. He stood watch, he made calls, and most importantly, he sat with Eleanor on her new front porch listening. She told him about Arthur, about their life together, about raising their children in this very house. She told him about her loneliness since he had passed, and her terror as Sterling began to circle her like a vulture. In turn, he told her little bits about himself, not much, just fragments. A war he couldn't forget, a family he had lost, a brotherhood he had found on the open road. They were two lonely souls from different worlds, finding a common ground in shared loss and a stubborn refusal to be broken. The town of Harmony Creek watched all of this with a mixture of confusion and wonder. The terrifying bikers hadn't pillaged or plundered. They hadn't caused a single bit of trouble. Instead, they were fixing a widow's porch. They were carrying her groceries. They were standing guard over her home like a pack of loyal, leather-clad guardian angels. The narrative began to shift. Fear gave way to curiosity, and curiosity gave way to a grudging respect. The waitress, Betty, started bringing them free coffee and pie every afternoon. Gus from the diner dropped off sandwiches. The hardware store owner forgot to charge Bear for the lumber for the new porch steps. The community, shamed by its own inaction, was trying to make amends. They were beginning to understand that monsters don't always wear leather, and heroes don't always wear shining armor. The inevitable confrontation came on the third day. A black sedan, even more expensive than the one Sterling had driven before, pulled up to the end of the lane. Mr. Sterling got out, but he wasn't alone. With him were two large, thuggish-looking men in cheap suits and Sheriff Miller, a man whose gut strained the buttons of his uniform and whose face was slick with sweat and unease. Stryker was waiting for them on the porch, sitting on the swing next to Eleanor. The rest of the chapter fanned out across the lawn, a silent, unmoving line. They weren't armed, at least not visibly. They didn't need to be. Their presence was weapon enough. "Stryker," the sheriff called out, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "This has gone on long enough. You and your people are trespassing. I'm ordering you to vacate this property immediately." Stryker didn't move. He just looked at the sheriff with a pitying expression. "Are you here on official police business, Sheriff? Or are you here as Mr. Sterling's personal errand boy?" The sheriff flushed a deep, mottled red. "I'm here to enforce the law. There is a legally executed court order for Mrs. Gable to vacate these premises." He brandished a piece of paper. "Let me see it," Stryker said calmly. The sheriff hesitated, then reluctantly walked up the path, holding out the paper as if it might bite him. Stryker took it, his eyes scanning the document quickly. "This order was signed by Judge Franklin Meyer," Stryker noted. "That's right," Sterling said with a triumphant smirk. "Ironclad." "Funny thing about Judge Meyer," Ghost said, stepping forward from the line of bikers. He was holding his phone again. According to his bank records, which were surprisingly easy to access, he received a deposit of $50,000 from a holding company owned by Sterling Developments just 2 days before he signed this order. "The IRS has a term for that, Sheriff. It's called bribery. The state bar has another term for it. It's called disbarment. And I believe the district attorney has a third term for it. It's called a felony." Sheriff Miller's jaw went slack. He looked from Ghost's phone to Sterling's suddenly panicked face. "Richard, is this true?" "Don't listen to him. It's slander. It's a lie," Sterling shrieked, his composure shattering completely. He turned to his two hired goons. "Get them out of here. I don't care how you do it." The two thugs took a step forward, but stopped dead as Bear took a single, deliberate step to block their path. He was twice their size, and his expression made it clear that proceeding would be a catastrophic mistake. They wisely stayed put. "It gets worse, Sheriff," Ghost continued, his voice as calm as a mortician's. "It turns out Mr. Sterling's entire development plan was based on fraudulent environmental impact reports and forged zoning permits. I took the liberty of forwarding my complete findings to a reporter I know at the state capitol's biggest newspaper. And I also sent a copy to the FBI's Public Corruption Division. I believe their office is in the city, just a 2-hour drive from here. I'd expect they'll be paying you and Judge Meyer a visit very, very soon." The mask was gone. The wolf was revealed, cornered and rabid. Sterling's face was a twisted mess of fury and terror. He had been so sure of his power, his influence. He had never imagined that a group of greasy bikers could so completely and utterly dismantle his entire world. He lunged, not at the bikers, but at Eleanor. It was a desperate, pathetic act of a coward trying to grab a hostage. "You old witch, this is all your fault." He never made it. Stryker moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He intercepted Sterling mid-lunge, his hand clamping down on the man's shoulder like a vice. He didn't punch him. He didn't throw him. He just held him. He neutralized him. "It's over, Sterling," Stryker said, his voice cold as ice. "You lost." As if on cue, 2 state police cruisers, sirens screaming, came roaring down the lane, kicking up a cloud of dust. They screeched to a halt behind Sterling's car. 2 troopers, professional and grim-faced, stepped out, their hands on their holsters. Ghost had made more than one call. Sheriff Miller looked at the state troopers, then at the bikers, then at the evidence of corruption laid bare on a smartphone screen. He saw his career, his freedom, his entire life circling the drain. In a moment of craven self-preservation, he made his choice. He turned on his cousin. "Richard Sterling," he said, his voice trembling as he pulled out his handcuffs. "You are under arrest for bribery, fraud, and extortion." The fight went out of Sterling completely. He sagged in Stryker's grip, a defeated, broken man. Stryker released him, shoving him toward the now eager sheriff. As the disgraced developer was cuffed and led away, one of the state troopers approached Stryker. He was a young, clean-cut officer who looked at the biker with a new, uncertain respect. "We got a call from an anonymous source," the trooper said. "Looks like you folks had everything under control." "Just helping out a neighbor," Stryker replied gruffly. The trooper nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Well, on behalf of the state, thank you. You did a good thing here." He tipped his hat to Eleanor and then returned to his car. The sirens started up again, and the parade of official vehicles drove away, taking the filth of Sterling's corruption with them. Silence descended on the small front lawn. It was over. Truly over. Eleanor Gable stood on her porch, her hand on the new, sturdy railing Bear had built. She looked at the 5 bikers standing in her yard, their leather cuts dusty, their faces grim but satisfied. They were the most unlikely saviors she could have ever imagined. And they were the only ones who had answered her call. Tears filled her eyes once more, but this time they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, profound gratitude. "You saved my home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." Stryker walked up the steps and stood before her. "We told you, ma'am. We protect our own." He paused, then a rare, small smile touched his lips. "And I guess that includes you now. Welcome to the family." And with that, Eleanor Gable, the quiet widow of Harmony Creek, was formally, if unofficially, adopted into the Sons of Redemption Motorcycle Club. She became their matriarch, their anchor in a world that had, until now, only offered them scorn. The aftermath was a quiet celebration. Raven made a pot roast, and they all sat around Eleanor's dining room table, a bizarre and beautiful tableau of a found family. Bear told terrible jokes that made Eleanor laugh until she cried. Doc talked to her about her rose garden. Ghost even showed her how to use a tablet computer he had bought for her so she could video call her grandchildren. They stayed for another week, making sure every loose end was tied up. The lawyer Ghost had found arrived. A firecracker of a woman who was delighted to help Eleanor file a massive civil suit against Sterling and the corrupt city council members. The story in the state newspaper broke, and Harmony Creek was thrown into the spotlight. The mayor resigned. The judge was disbarred and indicted. The town was forced to clean house, to purge the corruption that had festered for so long beneath its placid surface. When it was finally time for the Sons of Redemption to leave, the entire town came out to see them off. It was a surreal sight. The same people who had cowered in fear just a week before were now lining Main Street, waving and cheering. Gus, from the diner, pressed a bag of food into Raven's hands. Betty, the waitress, gave Stryker a shy hug. Children reached out to touch the chrome on their bikes, their eyes wide with hero worship. Eleanor stood on her porch, her hand held by the new, honest sheriff who had replaced Miller. She didn't cry. She just smiled, a bright, beautiful smile that erased years of sadness from her face. Stryker walked up to her for one last goodbye. "You have my number," he said. "You call us if you need anything. Anything at all. We'll be here." "I know you will," she said, her voice full of certainty. She reached up and placed a small, framed object in his hands. It was a photograph of a young, smiling Arthur in his uniform. "He would have wanted you to have this. A soldier for a soldier." Stryker looked at the picture, then back at Eleanor. He nodded, his throat suddenly tight. "I'll keep it safe." He swung his leg over his bike, the engine roaring to life with a familiar, comforting thunder. He looked at his chapter, ready to ride. He looked at the town, now safe. He looked at the woman on the porch, now family. He had come to this town for a simple meal. He was leaving with so much more. With a final nod to Eleanor, Stryker pulled out onto the road, his brothers and sister falling into formation behind him. They rode out of Harmony Creek, not as feared outlaws, but as celebrated heroes. Their reputation had been transformed, not because they had changed, but because the world had finally been forced to see them for who they truly were. A year passed. The seasons turned in Harmony Creek. Spring brought blooming roses to Eleanor Gable's garden, more vibrant than ever before. She was no longer a lonely widow. Her house was often full of life. Bikers with names like Bear and Doc and Raven would appear on her doorstep unannounced, bringing gifts, helping with chores, or just sitting with her on the porch swing, sharing stories of the road. She was there, Nana Ellie, and her home was their sanctuary, a quiet harbor from the storms of their lives. The town itself was healthier too. The corruption had been scoured away, and the new town council was filled with honest folk who listened to their citizens. The story of the widow and the bikers had become a local legend, a cautionary tale for the arrogant and an inspirational one for the brave. The Corner Nook Diner had a new framed picture on the wall, right next to the photo of the town's founding fathers. It was a picture of 5 leather-clad bikers standing proudly on Eleanor Gable's new porch. The Sons of Redemption had changed in a way. The world's perception of them had altered their path. People no longer just feared them. Sometimes they sought them out. A desperate call from a neighboring town about a women's shelter being intimidated by a local gang. An email from a father whose son had fallen in with a bad crowd. A whispered plea from a runaway teen at a truck stop. Stryker and his chapter answered the calls. Their mission, once an internal code, had become an external purpose. They were still nomads, still ghosts on the highway, but now they rode with a new weight, a new responsibility. They were guardians. On the anniversary of the day they first rode into Harmony Creek, Stryker found himself on a long, empty stretch of highway in a different state. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He pulled over, killing the engine. The sudden silence was vast and peaceful. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the small, framed photo of Arthur Gable. He had carried it with him for a year, a talisman, a reminder. He looked at the young soldier's hopeful face. "We're trying, brother," Stryker whispered to the photograph. "We're trying to do right by you." His phone buzzed. It was a text from Ghost. A new location, a new person in trouble, a new fight to be fought. Stryker put the photo away, his duty calling him back to the present. He fired up the engine, its roar shattering the evening. Calm. It was the sound of purpose, the sound of redemption. He pulled back onto the asphalt ribbon, a lone rider, heading toward the next horizon, forever chasing the promise of the road. He was a monster to some, a hero to others. But to the lost and the helpless, he was something more. He was hope riding on 2 wheels, clad in black leather, with the heart of a phoenix rising from the flames. And he was not alone. He was never alone.